Now we're recording. So we're recording the webinar for future views. So now I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce you to our guest speaker today. The presentation today is titled The Power and the Practice of Hope. So Christa Slatnik is a nurse practitioner in Gynecologic Oncology at CancerCare, Manitoba. Christa had over 11 years of experience working as a nurse with antepartum, which is high-risk pregnancies, gynecology and gynecologic oncology patients at the Women's Hospital at the Health Sciences Center in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She then joined the team at CancerCare Manitoba in 2012 after completing her master's in nursing at the University of Manitoba. So throughout Christa's years at Health Sciences Center, she was highly involved with ensuring a hopeful community by creating a WRS5 interdisciplinary hope team, while also being a part of the HSC Hope Task Force and facilitating at biannual Hope workshops. So I know that I also cover the province of Manitoba, and I have had the pleasure of working with Christa in planning some workshops for ovarian cancer survivors. And seeing this presentation live, you guys are in for a great hour. Christa's also been very involved in volunteering with the ovarian cancer community and has been a volunteer with Ovarian Cancer Canada for over 16 years. And in fact, in 2013, Christa and her identical twin sister, Cindy, won the Peggy Troscott Award and also won the Future Leaders of Manitoba Award in January of 2015. And that award was about acknowledging her outstanding service in the community, while also advocating for the health and success of Manitobans affected by gynecological disease. Christa is passionate about helping patients foster hope as they transition in all aspects of their cancer journey. So on a personal note, Christa is married to her husband, Todd, and they have 2 beautiful daughters and a new puppy. So that's exciting, I'm sure. They love the outdoors and are super excited to go camping this summer. As I mentioned before, Christa has an identical twin sister, Cindy, and together they have co-chaired the Walk of Hope in Winnipeg. I believe this will be their 16th year, so thank you for that as well. So now, without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Christa.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to share my screen, and I hope that this works well. Just gonna pop open the presentation here. Okay, so the power and practice of hope. Can you guys see me? Yeah, I think so. Okay. So with this, the power and practice of hope, the presentation is going to be basically, oh, there we go. We're going to talk a few different ways about defining hope. That's a tricky subject because hope is used pretty much every day in our vocabulary. I hope it's nice outside today, or I hope you have a great day. I hope you stay safe with COVID and the pandemic and everything going on right now. But actually defining hope can get a little tricky. Even the scholars have a hard time all agreeing on one definition. So we are going to review some different suggestions as to what the definition of hope may be. Then we're going to talk about the importance of reflecting on hope once we have a general understanding of what we feel our definition of hope is, and then different ways to activate hope, because everybody goes through different cycles in life where they maybe feel a little bit hopeless. So we're going to talk about different ways that we can either activate our own hope or help our loved ones have activate their hope. So for defining hope, it does get a little tricky. There are several definitions out there. Rona Jevney is one of the most famous hope researchers, and she says hope is about possibilities in the face of uncertainty. So that's a very kind of basic, easy go-to where we all can understand that. I love this one. They created in Alberta a video called this thing called Hope that we used to actually show at our Health Sciences Center Hope workshops to staff basically from across all different, from finance to nursing to management to doctors. And we showed this video called This Thing Called Hope, and their definition was hope is like a life jacket. You don't realize you have it on until you fall out of the boat. And another one is hope is not that everything will turn out okay, but that it will be okay no matter how things turn out. Kirsten Weir has recently written that hope is associated with many positive outcomes, including greater happiness, better academic achievement, and even lower risk of death. It's a necessary ingredient for getting through tough times, of course, but also for meeting even everyday goals. There's also the suggestion that hope is the belief that circumstances will get better. It's not a wish for things to get better, it's the actual belief, the knowledge that things will get better, no matter how big or how small. And we'll talk about how that can change in different parts of our journey as we move through different things. Oops. Hope is also a process of anticipation that involves the interaction of thinking, acting, feeling, and relating, and is directed toward a future fulfillment that is personally meaningful. So that's Gaskin, another famous hope researcher, and Hirth actually is a well-known hope researcher that actually created, it's called the Hirth Hope Index. So we actually did some we used that at Women's Hospital for a little bit. We were looking at doing studies. There's been lots of studies on that, the Hirth Hope Index, to be able to evaluate people's hope so we can help people that maybe have lower levels of hope. And she says an inner power, hope is an inner power that facilitates the transcendence of the present situation and movement toward new awareness to enrichment of being. So as you can see, there's several different parts of hope. There are several different explanations of hope. No matter, even though everybody can't necessarily agree on one specific definition per se, nobody doubts the value of hope. We do know that life is difficult without it. And obviously that hopelessness has been shown to lead to depression and anxiety and mental health issues. So if we can really help look at, help people know or see at least kind of what is. We know that reality is what is, but hope is basically what takes that reality and isn't just okay with kind of just what is, but what could be. So it accepts what is, but it also has this hope that, you know, there could be something else better than this. Now, the tricky part with hope when we're defining hope is this kind of scary term called false hope or unrealistic hope. Now, the tricky part, especially when you're diagnosed with a cancer or ovarian cancer, when you're diagnosed with or recurrent disease or whatnot, if you have hope, sometimes people think it's a false hope, or sometimes family or caregivers or healthcare practitioners will say, oh, we don't want them to have unrealistic hope. That's going to be false hope, and that can be dangerous. But really, who gets to decide what is realistic and what isn't? Devney says, there's no such thing as false hope. My hope is not your hope. So hope is really up to me as to what I decide to hope for. And we're going to talk about having several different hopes. But it's okay to have several different types of hope, even if it's hope for cure, when somebody else might think that that's maybe unrealistic or false hope. Groupman says that true hope acknowledges the reality of the situation and still chooses hope. So a different term that we like to use is audacious hope. Audacious hope is more the ability to take action towards a goal that has little likelihood of being achieved. So just as an example, there was a runner called Roger Bannister in 1954. And scientists said that it is physiologically impossible to run super fast. They basically said 4-minute mile, not possible. And he basically said, okay, and they told him that it's unrealistic, it's false hope to run anything faster than that. And sure enough, in 1954, he broke a world record and ran a 4-minute mile. So that audacious hope is really what helped him get to that, to believe that it actually could happen. And then oddly enough, 3 weeks later, somebody else did the exact same thing once they realized and saw that it was possible. So audacious hope is more considered a motivational phenomenon, something that we can name, support, and talk about. So there's so many things that has changed over the past century that once was said to be impossible. So there's, even the development of certain medicines, or for certain people to be able to vote, or there's so many different ways that 100 years ago, if we would have thought that that was impossible, that's hopeless. That's false hope, that it's actually happened. So we're really trying to change that terminology to more audacious hope. And it's kind of cool because there's actually scientists now that are looking into how hope works. So it's called psychoneuroimmunology. It's a bit of a tongue twister there, but so they basically find that emotions, thoughts, and attitude have a definite effect on the body. So they're starting to really realize how hopelessness, but also how hope can really affect the body. So hope has the ability to cause electrical chemical changes that, and like hundreds and a couple hundred hormones in our body, just from simple hope, having this hope in our head that I hope that that's possible. I hope I'm going to have a good day. I hope that I'm going to survive much longer than expected. These thoughts in our mind affect our body, and it influences the workings of our individual organs. It actually has the influence on the strength of our immune system, and we know how important our immune system is, especially when fighting off viruses or cancer cells. And it ultimately has the potential to influence the receptors on tumors. So that's where we're starting to see that it may actually be some benefit in having high hopes. And we'll talk about, different types of hopes, but high hopes are okay too. Some are even suggesting that hope is actually medicine's placebo. So I'm sure you've all heard of the placebo effect, but the placebo effect is basically when you take a sugar pill and you're told it might be medicine, it might not be. And they compare it to the people that are actually taking the new medicine. And there is typically always a placebo effect. So the people that are taking the new medicine, they're comparing to see whether or not the benefit is higher than the placebo. But the placebo still typically always has a benefit compared to people that aren't taking anything. So they couldn't really figure out, well, how is this possible? Why is this placebo effect happening? And the theory now is that it's because of hope. They have hope that they're taking the pill that actually has the medicine in it and not the sugar pill. So it's that hope that ultimately helps with making sure that it actually sometimes improves things. So just for example, placebo studies have shown that in arthritic patients, it actually significantly decreases the pain level in arthritis. For asthma, placebo has been found to increase the ease of breathing. And in Parkinson's, it's actually decreased the rigidity of movement. So it's pretty exciting to be able to see this hope effect, and this has been for years, but we're just starting to realize, especially with this psychoneuroimmunology, to see kind of why that's happening. So for ovarian cancer, the hope, this is a little Pac-Man picture, because the hope is that it can actually potentially the hope is that hope can actually decrease the risk of cancer growth, or decrease how quickly cancer is growing, or maybe get rid of it completely sometimes because of that, the connection with that mind body that we don't fully understand yet. Some people, we do know that people that picture little Pac-Mans, especially if say they're getting their chemo, if they picture little Pac-Mans going and eating up the cancer cells, that's actually been shown to help for some people. So how is that possible? We don't know. Could it be hope, right? So they're learning more and more, and in several years, I'm sure we're going to fully understand that at some point. If we ever completely understand, I'm not sure, but we do know that hope plays a huge part in that. So once we've had a chance to kind of define on what hope means to us, because that is going to be a little bit different for everybody, it's important to then reflect on our hope. So the purpose of reflecting on our hope is to assess the role of hope in your life and establish your hope practices. What have you done in the past in order to become hopeful? Because everybody's gone through different episodes of hopelessness, or feeling a little less hopeful at certain days, and that's okay. It would be abnormal not to have occasional times like that on the roller coaster of life. So it's looking back and seeing, what did I do in those down moments in order to help have hope and bring my hope back in order to get back to the top part of the roller coaster. And just a little side, I love the theory of the roller coaster of life, because I once learned that with the roller coaster, if life wasn't a roller coaster, it would be pretty boring if it was just always flat. We need those downs in life on the roller coaster in order to fully appreciate the ups. So when a down comes in life, it's trying to remember that's okay. It's just a down part of my life. It's a down part of my day. It's a down part of my year, whatever it might be in that roller coaster, and trying to appreciate it as it's a down. I'm going to work on my strategies in order to help me get back to the top of the roller coaster, but I'm not going to dwell too much about being on the down, because I know I can help myself get up. I can lean on my friends and family and my healthcare team to help myself get back up. But being okay with that roller coaster and just enjoying the ride. But leaning on people if you need to, and the different tips if you need to in order to help. Determining your current level of hope can help, because sometimes people might not realize that they're actually leaning a little bit more to the hopeless side and wondering, why am I feeling so depressed lately, or so anxious? And then they realize, oh shoot, it's because my hope is quite low right now. I'm feeling very hopeless. And then to plan to incorporate some hope strategies in order to help activate your hope. And we'll talk about some different suggestions for that. So Jevni and the hope researchers have found that hope should be reviewed at several different points in that roller coaster of life. When we're talking about cancer, for example, initial diagnosis is very important, obviously, because when you're hit with you have cancer, first of all, you don't hear half of the things that they say at that point, but a lot of people have this sudden drop in hope. So it's very important to evaluate that so we can try to catch that quickly. And then also, obviously, any major changes in physical status when that occurs. So whether it's with a recurrent disease, or sometimes it's because of a side effect of the treatment. And then sometimes it's when end of life is either imminent, or maybe now you've just been told, you're on third line or fourth line chemo. We know this isn't curable. Death isn't necessarily imminent per se, but we know that we need to start planning different things and making sure we're not getting hopeless along that roller coaster when things are changing. Now, these are just some different examples that Duggleby found in a study, and it's been kind of well documented that there's different types of hope that people have at different stages of their journey. So non-terminally ill patients go through different hopes, especially hope for cure being at the forefront of that. But terminally ill patients obviously have different hope. So it's not necessarily hope for cure anymore, although it can be. You can have a tiny bit of it. We usually say don't put all of your hope in one basket, right? So for example, with the non-terminally ill, if you had all of your hope in hope for cure, and that then is taken away from you, then a lot of people then feel this sense of hopelessness. So it's very important to have other hopes, like hope for getting better, hope for living longer, for surviving, for having relief of pain. So then if you do get a recurrent diagnosis that's not great prognosis, then you don't lose all of that hope. You just lose a little bit of it. But once again, that audacious hope can stay there, right? Because some people surprise us, and they can sometimes surpass all odds, and they can be cured when we weren't expecting them to be. So be very, very careful when you're accepting statistics. But just as an example, I'm going to show my mom here. So this is a picture of Cheryl Cragnell. She was a nurse for 30 years in Portage la Prairie, and I've got her picture in the office here because it brings me hope. And her hope journey changed throughout her entire cancer diagnosis. In 1998, when she was first diagnosed, her hope definitely was for hope for cure. All of our hopes was hope for cure, even though we knew that the odds were, less than 50%, if not obviously worse, but that was okay. We were holding on to that hope for cure, and we needed that hope in our life at that time. She needed it. That's what got us through the chemo and making sure that she had the best life possible in that time. When the cancer came back a year later, then she had, the hope started changing a little bit, and it was hope for remission and hoping that the cancer would get back to sleep again. And then when it didn't work and she started having more progressive disease, her hope changed to, I hope to make it to Christmas. I would really love to have one last Christmas with my family. And we had the most amazing Christmas with her. She was a little bit sick, but she was with us, and she was so happy to be there, and we had amazing memories. And then Christmas passed, and her hope was to see her twin daughters graduate from nursing. So in 2000, she was admitted to the hospital, so she was a little too sick to be able to get to our actual graduation. So she threw a little graduation party in the hospital for us. So it was an amazing memory. And then her hope changed for hope for a peaceful death. And obviously, as being her daughters in our early 20s, it was very difficult to go through. But her hope, and although our hopes were different at different points in time, her having hope and us trying to support those hopes, it really changed our overall memories and experience of the entire situation. And we can now look back at that as our family, and with our dad, and be able to cherish those memories in those last few months and minutes that we had with her. So it's just showing that hope can change at different points in the journey, and that's okay. And understanding that it really can change the overall journey for everybody involved, and especially the person going through it. So as caregivers, as a family member, loved one, friend, family, and we had other friends that were caregivers for mom too that helped out, and even healthcare workers. When caregivers evaluate their own level of hope, they're evaluating their ability to be effective helpers. Snyder is a very well-known researcher in hope, and they suggest thinking about what makes your support meaningful, what makes your contribution important, and what is it that keeps you coming back to help. So evaluating your own hope can actually really help you help your loved one be hopeful as well. Some suggested questions to reflect on your hope, or if your loved one is seeming hopeless and you're trying to help them with reflecting, you can suggest some different questions like, what role has hope played in your life? At what points was hope at its lowest, and at what points was hope at its strongest? What are some of the successes that you've had in your life? What are some things that help give you inner strength? And what is one thing that helps you cope? So once you've had some time to reflect on hope, the hope is then to be able to use some different strategies in order to activate hope. So caring relationships was actually found to be a very important part of activating hope, which is really encouraging because it gives those of us in a caring role, whether we're a healthcare worker or a family or a friend that's trying to help somebody going through a difficult journey. Caring relationships is very, very important. So even if you are simply just providing part of that caring relationship and being there for them, that actually in itself is a hope strategy. So you're already actually helping that person either having or maintaining hope. Humor and play is very important, determination and courage. Setting short-term attainable goals is huge. A lot of times people are focused just on the long term, which is very important. It's important to hope for a cure, or it's important to hope for a peaceful end of life. But short-term hopes are essential. Sometimes we think about the little tiny things that I hope I'll be able to have access to make my days as good as they can be. Spirituality is very important for a lot of people, to reminisce on memories that brought us hope in the past. Pain management and symptom control is very important. When people have uncontrolled pain or uncontrolled symptoms, that actually leads to hopelessness. People are too exhausted, they find, in order to maintain that hopeful attitude. So making sure that you're either advocating for yourself or advocating for your loved one to be treated as appropriately or aggressively as possible in order to maintain that quality of life and that quality of symptom management, because that ultimately actually can help with their hope level too. And sharing hope stories can be very helpful too. So these are just more concrete suggestions. So sometimes people really like to begin their day with a hope quote or a positive affirmation. Sometimes people even have like a positive affirmation up on their bathroom mirror. So when they're brushing their teeth in the morning, they see that reminder of that importance of maintaining that positivity or that hopeful attitude. Acknowledging your own and your loved one's hopeful behavior. So when you do have those hopeful behaviors, and it's kind of nice to point that out, because even when we might be having a rough day, you might not see those happening. So it's nice to point out and say, hey, that was really hopeful. try to identify the hope in unexpected situations. So sometimes it's hard to do that. So when you find it, it's a good practice to be able to say, okay, well, if I found hope in that, because there's hope in everything, then I can find hope in this, not a problem. Looking at what is right rather than what is wrong. And that can be tricky sometimes, especially if we're feeling like we're on the down part of that roller coaster. So remembering that it's okay if you're having a negative day or a hopeless day, but understanding that it doesn't feel great to be at the bottom end of the roller coaster for a long period of time. So in order to try to help acknowledge, okay, this is why I'm feeling this way, I'm going to work on now different ways to be able to help bring myself up again. And remembering to just enjoy that roller coaster along the way, that entire journey. The ups and downs are all important. So try to enjoy the roller coaster of life. Family meetings are important to discuss short and long-term goals and hopes. At Women's Hospital and at CancerCare Manitoba, sometimes we do something called hope planning sessions. They've been very helpful, especially when we're actually helping people approach end of life. Family meetings can be very helpful, but you do not need a healthcare practitioner to help you with this. It can be simply just a family meeting with everybody in your bubble right now, your 6-foot bubble. But it basically is talking about your long-term goals and hopes, especially if we have a terminal illness. It's nice to be able to get all those hopes out on the table, and because sometimes they're different, or sometimes we're assuming this is somebody's hope, so we're trying to support that hope, but that wasn't actually their hope in the first place. So little things like, or sometimes, you know, somebody else's hope might be hope for cure when I'm the one with cancer, and my hope is really just to have a peaceful death, and that's okay for people to have different hopes. So sometimes discussing that gets it all out on the table, and you don't have to change other people's hopes, because remember, your hope is not my hope, but it's just understanding that these are my hopes. And little things like, just for an example, we had a hope planning session for somebody that we were helping her try to decide if she wanted to have a peaceful end of life at home for kind of a long-term goal, or if she was okay with the peaceful end of life in the hospital. But it was also then the short-term hopes, like her daily hopes. And one little thing came up and she said, oh, I would love to have an ice cap every day. I love ice caps. She wasn't even drinking much, but she just loved the flavor of them. And the son piped up and he's like, well, Mom, I didn't know that. I can get you an ice cap. And he just lit up. He just seemed so excited that there was this now concrete thing that he could do in order to help his mom have the best days possible. So little hope discussions can actually be very helpful. Sometimes people feel like, well, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to ask for that ice cap. But it is such a huge relief when you can share those little daily hopes with your friends and family, because it helps give them concrete things that they can do in order to make sure that your days are as good as they can be. Talking about your hope and what brings you hope can be very helpful. Some people do hope rituals, whether it's through meditation, or sometimes people have little poems that they say. Hope images are very important. As you can see, the sunflower down here, that's Ovarian Cancer Canada's symbol of hope. Obviously the sun, or the sunflower always looks towards the sun. It's a very positive and bright and cheerful flower, but it's this hopeful image that it never sees the shadows because it's always looking towards the sun. But everybody has different hope images or hope models that sometimes you don't really think about it. When we used to do hope workshops, we would ask everybody to either bring a hope image or something that brought them hope, and it's kind of hard to think about that kind of stuff until you really sit back and reflect and think, oh yeah. So I'll show you what brings me hope at the end of the slides. But I mean, a lot of things bring me hope, including this beautiful sunflower and the teal slides, and the wave. That's why I actually chose the PowerPoint slides. So a variety of different things can bring you hope. Using hope language and having a hopeful environment is very important. Hope language is actually hope is actually embedded in our communication, Jevni says. So this is just an example. The wrong words or the wrong attitudes are actually as toxic as the wrong medicine, she suggests. And we really do have to be careful in how we're presenting statistics, for example, in the healthcare team, because unfortunately there's evidence that shows that if somebody presents statistics on the negative side, so let's just say 50-50, if you have a 50% chance of cure and a 50% chance of no cure, if a doctor or somebody presents that to you as, oh, you've got a 50% chance that you're not going to survive from this disease. And, you know, so I'd start preparing for end of life. We always want to prepare for end of life. We never know when that's going to happen, right? But you know, they prepare you, they want to warn you, and that's okay. I mean, it's important to know those kind of things, but just be very, very careful if anybody gives you statistics, or if you're really asking for statistics. You are not a statistic, you are not a number. Nobody is a number, and nobody knows what's going to happen in the overall outcome. It's good to have general idea to prepare for things, but at the same time, even if there's a 1% chance, if you had a 1% chance of winning the lottery, that's a pretty good chance. Most of us would be out buying lottery tickets, right? So it's just being very, very careful with how we accept those statistics, because research actually shows if it's presented on the negative side, you actually more likely are to put yourself in that negative side of the statistics. And with a little that less hope, that can actually lead to poor outcomes. Whereas if you're given it in the positive side, then that can actually help with your overall quality of life, your overall sense of well-being, and potentially your overall outcome. So just being very careful with statistics, because if you are pushing for those statistics, or sometimes the doctors just use them, although a lot of them don't tend to, just being very careful and you know, how you accept that information. Even if it's presented negatively, you don't have to listen to it that way when you know that this is how it's being presented to me, and I know that that's important as to I choose how I interpret that. So just be very careful with statistics, and it's just reminding everybody, and especially people in the healthcare team, that we are ethically responsible for the lethal use of our language. So I'm really trying to advocate for that hopefulness in how we're presenting things. How can we make statistics sound more hopeful? So even as a caregiver, a loved one, to have a loved one, or somebody, if you're looking at Google, be very careful, because you have the choice too. How can you make statistics sound more hopeful, right? So just being very careful with that. Different suggestions of hopeful language are: whose example would you follow if you decided to behave in a hopeful manner? What is the smallest change that could increase your hope? What would a hopeful person do in your circumstance? And how would you be different if you were more hopeful? A hopeful environment is very important, and I hope this is not how your office, oh, sorry, of course my phone never rings, but I'm just gonna hang that up so it doesn't. It'll hang up. So this is unfortunately how my office looks right now. And I hope yours does not, but when we're working from home, it is important to try to not make your office work from this, like this, if you're working from home. But it just in general, clutter actually can be very dangerous for our mind. Clutter in your environment is clutter in the mind. So try to change that, and if you can, decrease the clutter. But sometimes people also have hope quotes or images. Sometimes people even create like a hope wall with a bunch of the things that bring them hope, or different sayings. At Women's Hospital, we had a hope quote up by the elevators. This painting here is a painting that brings me lots of hope, that we actually made at one of the Ovarian Cancer Canada different workshops in Winnipeg here. So it's really just looking at what brings you hope and having those visible. Having serene places to relax is very important. Sometimes even murals can be helpful. At CancerCare, we have this beautiful picture up that a patient had made, and she explains it as inhale, a quiet moment; exhale, negative thoughts; energy is saved for healing. So whatever kind of brings you hope. And then this is just an example of the different kind of places that you might go. So this is CancerCare Manitoba, and a quick glance, you know, it's just a lab. This is where you would go sit in the waiting room, but it's understanding that if you take some time to look around you, there's actually some really beautiful surroundings, the wall that changes colors, some beautiful natural elements with the trees and the warm lights. So it's just taking the time to look around you to appreciate some potentially hopeful environments that you might already be around, but if we're moving along quickly in the hustle and bustle, we might not notice that. And then I just wanted to throw in before we're done here this slide of Judith Dietrich. We had a hope mural, or a mural painted on the wall in one of the exam rooms at Women's Hospital, and she was my hope ambassador. She is now retired, and she was the hope ambassador of HSC, but she was my hope mentor, and I truly appreciate the guidance that she's given me to be able to help facilitate hope in others. So I just wanted to throw that in there because Judith brings me hope. And then just different to close off, we're going to go over to the question and answer now, but just some different things to reflect on when we're all done the presentation, as to different things that bring you hope. And where is your hope right now? What's the smallest thing that you could do in order to be hopeful? And try to think and reflect on what are some hopeful stories or hopeful images that bring me hope, that I can maybe have around me a little bit more often. So just to finish off, to close off, this is what brings me hope. This is a picture of the Lake Manitoba. This is where my family cabin is, and I grew up here. I spent a lot of time with my mom, and if you look, it's actually pouring rain. There you can see the raindrops in the lake, but the beautiful sunset is peeking through the clouds. And I just remember how relaxed I am when I'm there, even when it's raining. So that is pretty much it for me. So I'll pass it back over to Stephanie to review questions, but feel free, you guys can always email me as well after the presentation if anybody ever wants to review anything about hope or anything.
Awesome. Thank you, Christa. Just wanted to say I love that presentation. Like I said, I have seen it before and I've seen it in person. But it's always just such a reminder for me that hope is different for every person, and it comes in different shapes and it comes in different sizes, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something in the long term. Like it can be something immediate. For me this morning was, I hope we can get through this webinar without technical difficulty. So it doesn't have to be these great big huge things. It can be little things. So we do have a couple of questions that were submitted prior to the webinar. So I'm going to start with those, and then I see we also have a couple in the chat box as well. So first question. I feel that we are inundated by family and friends to have hope, but really is that for us or for them? Am I to work on having hope in opposition to the facts? Is the hope to help me or simply to ease the pain of those around me?
Yeah, that's a loaded one, and unfortunately a very common one, because it is so hard when we sometimes have different hopes than our loved ones, and sometimes there's this pressure to be positive or to be strong for our family, when sometimes it's a little bit harder when you're the one actually going through it. Just to kind of look back at what we discussed, it's talking about, it's okay, whatever your hope is your hope. It can be different than your loved one's hopes, and that's okay. And when you're talking about the facts, you know, like whether it's hope for cure or not, you don't have to hope for cure. Sometimes people want to hold on to a bit of that hope, and that can actually help them. Others are okay to not hold on to that hope, and that's okay. There's so many different types of hopes that you can have in order to get through your journey. So it's remembering, even just maybe pulling it back, and what are my daily hopes? What are some things that I hope for in order to help my days be as good as they can be? Even if you're not approaching end of life and that's several years away, we still want to have daily hopes and focus on getting through the day, especially with the pandemic right now. I mean, we don't even know what's happening next week, let alone a couple months from now. So that can be very overwhelming sometimes. So it's trying to figure out what are little hopes that I have in order to get through my day. And if my family want to hope for other things, like hope for cure or hope for you know, a better treatment to come up, or hope for research, that's okay. That's their hope, right? So, and helping them understand that you guys can have different hopes. That's okay. Never feeling pressured to have that. Sometimes you might just be feeling the pressure if you're potentially maybe having a little bit of hopelessness in general. Sometimes families see that and they say, oh, that, you know, mom seems really sad, or she's seeming depressed lately. Let's bring back her hope and remind her she can, you know, hope for cure, or hope for this. And it might feel more like pressure. So we're reflecting and sitting back and thinking, I wonder why they feel like I need to have hope. And think, oh, well, maybe I've been presenting myself as a little hopeless, not necessarily hopelessness for cure, but just hopeless in general. So trying to reflect on that too, and see where they're coming from. Sorry, there's my phone again.
No worries. I just had there was a comment here in the question section just to add to that question. And it was being with others, dealing with our disease helps by talking freely without worrying that our loved ones and that the others actually understand it. So another question that I had here was, living during these uncertain times of COVID-19, I find it even harder to have hope. What tips can you share that can help me deal with these new anxieties that I have and help me provide hope in each day? So I know you touched on that a bit in the presentation.
Yeah, and you can always go to Ovarian Cancer Canada's website and Facebook, because we did a little mini, like 2-minute tips and tricks on managing hope and mental health in a pandemic. So, but basically, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do, but a few of them are trying to, when you wake up in the morning, acknowledge any fears that you might have for that day, because that's okay, right? In that roller coaster of life, you're going to have some ups and downs, and fears, especially in a pandemic, are part of that. What are some different things that might be bringing me a little bit down? But then now, what are things that I'm looking forward to? What are some things that I'm going to be hopeful for? But also trying to then, as you move forward throughout the day, you might stub your toe and think, oh my gosh, it's going to be an awful day. Or, you know, I've got to go grocery shopping today. You know, I'm so scared to go out in public right now, and I don't want anybody invading my bubble. Acknowledge that, right? Like, it's normal to have those different thoughts and those different fears. But allowing ourselves to know, okay, well, what do I have control over? What can I do in order to prevent those fears from being real, or something that I don't have control over? So I'm going to wear a mask if I go somewhere where I know that I'm not going to be able to have that 6-foot distance. A lot of the things that we're also finding is that people, right now, it's getting a little bit better now that the world is opening up, but the disconnect from loved ones was huge when we weren't seeing our loved ones as much as or even just socializing with our friends and seeing people. So making sure that we're taking that time to connect with friends and family, whether it's through Zoom, if we can't see them yet in person, or go to somebody's backyard if you're allowed to, and have that 6-foot distance get together, just to make sure that you're having that connection with people. But and acknowledging that fear and uncertainty can lead to hopelessness a little bit. So acknowledging them as just thoughts, and knowing that I'm going to focus on my positive thoughts rather than the negative ones, because there are always positive thoughts throughout the day. And if you have some negative ones that are taking over, that's okay. Acknowledge them and realize, whoops, there they are again. I'm going to let go of those. That's the kind of how we deal with the fear of recurrence too, right? Oh my gosh, what was that? It must be the cancer. You know, it probably isn't the cancer, but little fears come in like that. And if we focus on those fears, that can lead to hopelessness, because then we start thinking, okay, well, that's for sure the cancer. Yeah, it must be, you know, the cancer's coming back, and we start snowballing, right? Whereas if we acknowledge those negative thoughts as simply thoughts, we have a little bit more control over preventing them from leading to hopelessness.
Thank you. So this is a comment. It sort of ties in with what you were just saying, and it's, I think, saying I hope something, for example, I hope I feel better, is not the same as being hopeful. I can hope for a lot of things without actually being hopeful, which is a much more positive feeling.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, I mean, it's all perspective, right? The being hopeful doesn't mean hopeful for cure, right? Like, being hopeful is, I'm going to get through today. I hope, you know, I've been having a challenging time with my girls with homeschooling, and, you know, like, there's a lot of different things that can sometimes make you feel a little less than hopeful. But it's really just knowing that when hopeful is simply just meaning that you have hope that you're going to get through something. I'm going to get through the day. I'm going to get through this cancer diagnosis. Getting through something doesn't mean that you're going to be cured, or that you're going to become a teacher and I'm going to homeschool forever, right? Like, it's really just having the hope that I'm going to get through this. I'm going to get through the day. I'm going to get through this, you know, this down part in my day. I'm not going to let hopelessness take over. And I'm going to, you know, have little mini hopes along the way, allowing some negative thoughts occasionally. That's okay, right? Those are going to come, and that's okay. So it's really, I think, all perspective, because having those little mini hopes is actually a form of being hopeful.
Thank you. So we have one final question comment here, Christa. I understand that having hope helps the family accept things more. Of course, it is easier and more pleasant to deal with a person that has hope, as it was with your mother. But when the cancer patient doesn't truly feel hope and finds it exhausting to have hope, how do we get through that?
Totally. So I guess it depends on how, like, what part of it is exhausting. A lot of that, so the word exhausting actually came up a lot when people were talking about hopelessness with, for example, pain or symptom management. The thought of even thinking about anything hopeful was way too exhausting because they were so tired and exhausted from fighting their pain or fighting their nausea or fighting any sort of symptoms that they were still dealing with. So I think it's really trying to make sure, first of all, that there's nothing inhibiting that hope, such as poor symptom management, because that's not acceptable. And no matter where you are in your journey, it is not acceptable to have poor symptom management. There's always something that we can do in order to help improve people's quality of life, by helping better manage nausea, pain, neuropathy, whatever it might be. If it's poorly affecting your quality of life, that's going to ultimately affect your ability to feel like you can have the energy to be hopeful. But so it's just remembering that even if you're exhausted, like, first of all, try to figure out why you're exhausted, because if it's because of symptom management, that needs to be dealt with. That's not acceptable. You need to help with your quality of life in order to help you have the energy to even try to be hopeful. But remembering that, yes, of course, it does help the family when you have that kind of hopeful attitude or you present yourself as hopeful. But it's not all about that. It's about trying to make sure that you're having your days as good as they can be. And maybe you're already having little mini hopes. Like, it's just really about wording, right? You don't have to word it that way. But if you're having rough days and rough time, and you're not able to look at things and enjoy little things along the way, they might be different than what you're used to, definitely, depending on where you are in your journey. But it's trying to know that, I'm going to try to make this day as good as I can, and if I'm having a hard time doing that, I'm going to lean on my friends and my family in order to try to help me get through this day, because I need some extra help with this, or I need some extra support with it. So, but never feeling pressured, right? Like, to be hopeful is really only if you want to be hopeful, right? Like, it's just having an understanding that if you feel like you're getting a little bit hopeless in different parts of your journey, that's okay. But if you want to feel a little bit more hopeful because you're feeling that might be leading to a little bit of depression or anxiety or mental health issues, or you're feeling like you're at the bottom of the roller coaster and you're having a harder time getting up and enjoying the day, or enjoying the day might just mean looking at pictures of memories or loved ones, or connecting with a friend and texting. And it doesn't necessarily mean getting out and doing the things that you used to love, which is hard sometimes to let go of, but it's doing little things that we would feel are helping us, you individually, making your day as good as they can be.
Thank you. I just wanted to read a comment from the chat box here. It kind of ties in nicely here too. It says, if you have access to a strong support group, it is a place where your fears, honesty, and hope can be shared with people, not your loved ones. Similar women understand. Those recurrence may be a fact there. Surprising success stories are the most direct access to hope. So that kind of brings me into another point here too. So I know we're in a challenging time right now with COVID and not being able to maybe attend support groups. We do have other options available. You know what, Ovarian Cancer Canada has an awesome online group called OV Dialogue. So it's a community of women living with ovarian cancer. It's a safe place where they can go, they can support one another, share information, share their experiences. So especially in these times when maybe we can't meet face to face, there are still these other options available. So OV Dialogue, you can jump on there and check it out. So regardless of where you live, I might live in a community in the far north of Saskatchewan where there is no support group. You know what, I can still jump on my computer and connect with other women to share those experiences and get that encouragement from there. So thank you, Christa, for an excellent presentation. It's always very inspiring and uplifting, and I appreciate it. So I know if you do have extra questions for Christa, she will be more than happy to answer them. You can email me and I can get her information out to you. And now I just had actually a couple other things I wanted to share with everybody, things that are coming up from Ovarian Cancer Canada. So I know we're going into summer. We just had the longest day of the year, my favorite day. And September is a couple months away, but that will be when our next webinar will be. It's also September is also Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month. So the webinar will be the management of ovarian cancer during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're currently just working on dates and details, so just watch for those, and that will be upcoming in September. And the last thing I wanted to just talk quickly about today was I'm excited. It's going to be our first ever virtual Walk of Hope coming up on September the 13th. So the walk might look a little bit different this year. We might not actually be physically meeting together with our whole community. The spirit of the walk is the same. It's all about bringing community together, supporting women living with this disease, and raising funds in order to provide support, raise awareness, and to fund much needed research into prevention and improved treatments. So I thought it was very fitting of this webinar that we just had today, the Walk of Hope. If you've never been before, it truly is an amazing day of hope. And I'm excited this year that I'll be walking in my home community with my team in Shelburne, Saskatchewan. So again, if you haven't participated in a walk before, or if you're not registered yet, you can sign up, grab some family, some friends. You can go to our website, ovariancanada.org, and you can sign up a team. And we'll look forward for everyone walking together wherever you are located on Sunday, September 13th. So thank you again, everybody, for joining me. One last little housekeeping is that I will be sending out an evaluation for the webinar. If you can please just take a couple minutes to fill those out. It really does help us plan and prepare for webinars in the future. The other thing is, like I said, this webinar was recorded today. So if you have family and friends you think might like to see it, it will be available to view on our website shortly. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us on this Wednesday morning. Have a great weekend. Christa, thank you again for taking the time. And I hope everyone has a great Canada Day next week.
Yes, and thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.